8:45. Let's get into some Gary Breen goodness here. So going to talk football with Daniel Harris next. First, Gary Breen was on commentary duty for Off the Ball yesterday with Stephen Doyle. Here he is talking about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's United.
It wasn't in isolation. It wasn't just on what I'd seen today. It's what I've seen at the back end of last season. Losing to Cardiff, losing to Huddersfield, and then being told, and this big spin of there's going to be a massive change, Manchester United about challenging at the top. Now suddenly we're talking about it's going to be 3 or 4 years. And the question I asked was, what are Manchester United fans thinking right now? Because he's a fan's favourite, he's an iconic figure at this club. Of course he is, but judge him on his merits as a manager, not as a player in terms of what he's done. And Joe obviously is a Manchester United fan because he didn't like to hear any criticism of Solskjaer, did he? And it's not necessarily criticism about him, because I know him a little bit. He was on my A licence. I know Mike Phelan, who was on my management diploma, and I know Michael Carrick from playing. These are great guys. They are, and they're Manchester United through and through. And as I said to Joe, on a romantic notion, I want to see these iconic figures leading the club back to former past glories as such. But just look at what he's doing as manager and look at his record. And everyone used it as stick to beat the previous ones who replaced Ferguson in Moyes, Van Gaal and Mourinho. And just because he is one of your own, don't ignore the actual results that we're seeing.
Yeah, that's Gary Breen speaking in the aftermath of the 2-0 defeat by West Ham at the City of London Stadium yesterday. From Manchester United's perspective, Daniel Harris is with us. Daniel, good morning to you. How you doing?
Good morning, hello.
So, it wasn't a smash and grab 2-0, it wasn't a fluke. It was West Ham are slightly better than Manchester United defeat at the moment, which I guess must rankle the most, because really there shouldn't really be a situation where West Ham are better than Manchester United.
No, I heard Gary was talking about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, but actually you can blame him to a certain extent. I think he picked the wrong team yesterday, but was there, of the fit players, was there a team available to him that you would be sure would definitely beat West Ham? And the answer to that, in my opinion, is no. And the reason for that is there are far more reasons for that than Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is not a good manager. So what I would say is that if you employ a young manager who's not very experienced, you have to be prepared for that manager to make mistakes and for that manager to learn on the job. But he doesn't have a midfield. And he wasn't given the money that he was meant to be given in order to strengthen the team. And you heard Gary Neville on Sky talking about it's going to take 3 windows, it's going to take 4 windows. The reason it's going to take that is because he's not being given the money all in one go to say, I'm going to address it right now. There was no reason why he couldn't have had more money to buy more players, apart from the fact that United have owners who use the club as their personal ATM, and their ambitions are not commensurate with the reputation of the club and with the ambitions of the supporters. And until that changes, you're going to see lots more of this.
Yeah. We'll talk about the Glazers and we'll talk about Woodward in a minute, but the one thing that Solskjaer is not in a position at the minute to, because of experience, because of just where he is in his managerial career, to rescue that scenario. Great managers around the world in world football might be able to get more out of this squad at the minute. So there's a trade-off between Manchester United investing in the time and the job and the energy to make Solskjaer great versus just getting somebody who might be able to get better results from this team. And, the difficulty is that Alex Ferguson, I suspect, would have been able to get more out of this team over the last 18 months. And because you're Manchester United, you'll always be compared with that. But because you're Man United, you should always be compared with the best manager in the world, because you should be trying to get the best manager in the world.
Yeah, I agree with that. But Alex Ferguson was a one-off genius. We'll never see anyone like him again. But then you talk about other managers, and you're sort of almost talking about Jose Mourinho or Louis van Gaal, who they employed after he'd done a ludicrously brilliant job at the World Cup. And those two guys didn't work. So if you were to say now who is the best manager in the world, they are not available. Probably the 2 best managers in the world are Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola. And by a hilarious twist of fate, they happen to be employed by United's closest rivals. United could not get those managers. So what they did was, they weren't very cheap option, let's be honest. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was a cheap option, but they went for someone who wants to try and build something. Whether he's capable of building something or not is hard to say. But Jose Mourinho didn't want to build something. He wanted immediate success. He bought players he thought would come in and do something immediately, and he wasn't too bothered about what happened subsequent to that. So they've employed a different kind of manager, and I think now you need to show a little bit of patience. I agree it wasn't great yesterday, but United have played okay on occasions this season. The players that Solskjaer bought in the summer seem to be doing pretty well. So I wouldn't get too agitated about what happens when you're without Paul Pogba, when you're without Anthony Martial, and when Marcus Rashford gets injured during the game. You don't have a lot of options because the squad is light. You could chastise Solskjaer for selling Alexis Sanchez, for letting him go away on loan, except what has he contributed in the time he's been at United? Is anyone seriously going to say that Alexis Sanchez would have done anything yesterday to redeem that situation? Would he bollocks? Of course not. He could have kept Romelu Lukaku, except Lukaku wanted to go. He probably needed the money in order to buy other players that he wanted. Lukaku's not part of his vision going forward. So although he wasn't allowed to replace him, having Lukaku knocking around, generally getting aggravated about not being able to play, not wanting to be there, would also have been problematic. So I don't think it's particularly difficult to defend him on those counts. But as I said earlier, he picked the wrong team yesterday. If you've got a midfield with Matic, Mata and McTominay, then running about creating things is going to be difficult. And there's no future in that midfield. So even if he'd have picked some younger players, if he'd have picked Angel Gomez, let's say, instead of Mata, how much worse could it possibly have been? And I think he was a little bit cautious in that aspect.
So when you say he's picked the wrong team, again, there's a few small decisions along the way. They feel like they're small decisions because it's somebody with 500 Premier League games versus somebody with 2 substitute appearances or whatever it is. But actually, part of that is about culture, right? Part of that is saying, actually, I don't think Juan Mata is going to be somebody that we believe in for the future because he isn't there anymore. So he needs to be braver too. He needs to get to that point where he's like, I'm going to just go for this and I'm going to, in some ways, actually win the fans over by buying some time with them.
Yeah, I mean, if I'd have been picking the team yesterday, I would have picked probably Fred instead of Matic and either Gomez or Lingard instead of Mata. Am I seriously going to say that with that team, I would be confident of seeing a completely different outcome? I could not say that. But it would have felt at least like there was an aim to where it was going. And perhaps this will now force his hand because he will have to play Mason Greenwood probably when he's healthy. And he might now say that Matic and Mata are finished, who knows. But the problem isn't the team that he picked yesterday, although I do think he picked the wrong team yesterday. The problem is that he doesn't have a serious football team available to him because he hasn't been given the money to buy that. And there's a lot of years of mess that need to be cleared up, and I think that he has started to do that. The question as to whether he's a good enough manager to manage United, I mean, the chances are he isn't, because who in the world is? Almost nobody. It's a difficult job, competing at the top level of football, so he probably isn't good enough, and things that seem too good to be true probably are. But at the same time, I think that showing some patience with what he's trying to do is the only way that things are going to improve, because let's say they fire Ole Gunnar Solskjaer today. Then what do? Who would you go and get if you were firing him and be sure that they were going to succeed?
Yeah, the problem is though, Daniel, like his CV for the job would have had him probably not in the top 200 managers that you could actually say is equipped for that job, because his CV was very, very ordinary. And the fact that he played for Man United, to me, is absolutely irrelevant. It has nothing to do with his suitability to the job at the moment. And if they're in a situation now where they don't look like they're going to be Champions League next season, where is Man United going to go financially? Like where are they going to be, and how long is it going to take for them to get there? And why they gave the job to a manager on the basis of his results over 8 to 10 games was, to me, completely myopic and absolutely stupid.
Well, I would say that I agree that his CV until United wasn't good enough for someone who should get that job. But on the other hand, he was appearing to prove himself for the job by actually doing the job. And it did seem like it was quite difficult not to give him the job, particularly when who are the other candidates for the job? They went for something different, and as I said before, they went for something cheap. But it's true that he doesn't have a lot to fall back on, and I think perhaps something that he should have done that he hasn't done is try and find an experienced coach, because at the moment he's got Michael Carrick and Kieran McKenna. We don't really know if they're any good. Perhaps they are good, but what they don't have is the experience. But again, if you gave United's current squad to Pep Guardiola or to Jurgen Klopp, I think they would struggle to get a result yesterday. When you take Paul Pogba out of that midfield and when you take Anthony Martial out of the front line, they've got a huge problem. And they gambled. I mean, they gambled that they didn't strengthen the squad, and they gambled that they wouldn't suffer these kind of injuries. And obviously, hilariously, it's happened almost immediately. The exact errors of parsimony that they made in the transfer market have come back to haunt them. And there's not a lot that you can do about that other than suffer, because the players to make things better aren't available to you. And as far as going in the Champions League, the only way that I could possibly look at this is that the Glazers are not that bothered about getting into the Champions League, because if they were, they would have made more money available. If they'd have given Solskjaer the money for 2 midfield players in the summer, in addition to the players that he bought, I think they'd have a pretty good chance of getting there. They decided not to take that gamble, and they decided that they would just continue milking the club rather than speculating to accumulate, essentially. And I don't think that they could possibly be that bothered about getting the Champions League, because in order to do that, it's now competitive. For the first decade of this century, you more or less knew who the 4 teams were going to be. There are now more teams competing for that, and the Glazers have decided that they don't really want a part of it. If you get there, very nice. If you don't get there, then whatever. Because if they were asked about it, they'd be funding it, and they're not.
That's bloody depressing. Like, I mean, I find the Manchester City situation kind of quite depressing in terms of the money that's just been thrown at them from Arab wealth or whatever. But on the flip side of that, like milking a club like Manchester United, a great club, purely for sort of, you know, for the purposes of making money, is pretty grim.
How long do you think it's going to be, Daniel, before Man United get back to competing for a championship? Realistically, at this point, it's hard to see the situation changing until there's a change in ownership, and there's no reason for the Glazers to sell at this point. So I can't see this changing. I can't see the circumstances changing until you find some amazing manager who is the next generation, who actually looks at everything that Man United have. Like, it'll be some messianic figure who somehow conspires against the odds to make that team a contender again.
It's partly that, and I think what the club are hoping for and really relying on, gambling on, is that the crop of young players who are coming through are really good. That seems to me to be the only way that this can possibly work. If Mason Greenwood, Taith Chong, Angel Gomez, Brandon Williams, Ethan Laird, Dylan Levitt, if a handful of them become good enough to play at the elite level, then that is the only way that United are going to be able to compete in the near to mid-term future, because otherwise it's going to take a lot of money that's not going to be made available. And as I said, like, if Pep Guardiola was managing this United team and he had the players that Solskjaer had, and he was given the funds that Solskjaer has been given, it would not be enough. You would expect to see United doing slightly better, because Pep Guardiola is some kind of football genius and a better manager than Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, but he would not be making a championship-winning team out of what he's got with this money. It's not possible. So the only way is if they get this crop of young players and they happen to be good enough, and who knows whether that's going to happen or not. I would say Mason Greenwood looks like a cert, but I don't think you can say that about any of the others at this point. And otherwise, it's going to be more of the same. And they might sack Solskjaer if it gets really terrible and get someone else, but that someone else is going to have the same problems that Solskjaer had, the same problems that Mourinho had, the same problems that Van Gaal had, the same problems that Moyes had. And the common thread here is not crap managers. The common thread is Manchester United under the Glazers.
There is, though, I mean, if they'd had one single overarching philosophy buying all the players over the last decade, then a lot of the money that has been wasted might not have been wasted. If you put the 40 million that they spend on bad centre-backs together, if you put the 40 million on midfielders that never make the starting 11, if you put all that money together and had somebody intelligent buying the players and negotiating in the transfer market, there's probably enough money for the team to be a top 4 team at least.
Yeah, I would say so. Like, Van Gaal in particular wasted quite a lot of money. And even if you look at Mourinho signings, how many of Mourinho's signings have been unqualified successes? I would say the answer to that is 0. So for sure, the money could have been spent better. And you need better scouting departments, you need better negotiators, you need all of those things. And it's true that United should be in the top 4 with the money that they've spent, perhaps. But given the situation that Solskjaer is in now and the mess that he has got to clear up, I don't think it's particularly surprising that they are where they are. And so they're mistakes that have been made previously. But if we look at the current situation, I don't think that there's that much better available, given the injuries that they've got, that United should be in the top 4 comfortably. I don't see it with this team.
Okay, I wanted to ask you about City and Liverpool at the weekend. Jared De La Fea had a chance at 1-0 to make it 1-1 for Watford, and skitters a bit left of the goals, and after that it's 5-0 in the blink of an eye. Inside the next 10 minutes, basically 5-0. Afterwards, the Watford goalkeeper was like, oh, listen, somebody's going to concede 10 to these guys before the end of the season. The Premier League is supposed to be the most competitive league in the world, and yet teams are definitely rolling over for City and saying, well, look, there's nothing we can do here. You're just too good for us. Part of it, I understand, because City are really good, but part of it is also like, come on, just like get in there and have a plan, try something, anything.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure it's so much that Watford wouldn't have had a plan. I think the problem is not even so much you see City winning 8-0, because that will occasionally happen. United beat Ipswich 9-0 and Forest 8-1. You see it, you do see it occasionally. The problem is more, to me, is the points tallies. You don't want the team that wins the league to be getting as many points as City got last season and the season before. And what you want is you want it to be competitive on a week-to-week basis. So you might see occasional serious hidings, but what you want is generally the games to be competitive. And when that stops happening, then your league has a problem. And if we see another season like last season where City and Liverpool get a ludicrous number of points, that is worrying. I don't really see what you can do about it, because how do you do something about it? The problem, I think, with City in particular is that obviously they've got an absolute load of money, and the particular style of football that they play, when it works, is very hard to beat, because you almost never have the ball, and there's not very much you can actually do to beat them. I mean, we saw it with Guardiola's Barcelona team, we saw it with his Bayern Munich teams, we saw it with Spain, even though Guardiola wasn't the manager. That style of football, when it's played well, is almost unbeatable, and that is a problem. And it's not about punishing City for being too good. It's that you want, as you say, you want your league to be competitive, and the league champions have always come from 2 or 3 clubs for the last 40 years. Liverpool dominated in the 70s and 80s, then it was United and Arsenal, then it was United and Chelsea. So it's not exactly about who wins the league, but the manner of them winning the league. So rather on a season-by-season basis, you want it to be competitive week to week. Who is going to win the games, and will the games be close? And the Premier League now has a problem, and it feels in some ways churlish about complaining about the problem, because you've got these two teams that are hitting incredible levels of excellence, but you don't want them to get this number of points, rather than you don't want them to occasionally win 8-0. You don't want that much either, but it's unusual. But on the week-to-week basis, it's the fact that they win almost every game, and that is difficult.
Yeah, it's becoming a bit more usual. And Liverpool Liverpool open a 5-point lead at the top of the table. Everybody's like, oh, it's a 5-point lead, but it's not a 5-point lead. It's a 5-point lead over Man City. It's a 7-point lead over Leicester, Arsenal, West Ham, and it's an 8-point lead over Bournemouth. None of those teams are going to compete for the title. So the league is now officially a 2-horse race, and we're 6 games in. Like, we knew it was before the season started, but it is now officially a 2-horse race for the rest of the year, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's been like that a lot before too. I think one of the other differences that the Premier League era and the influx of money has brought is that, apart from Leicester, that was a one-off, you don't see teams like QPR and Watford coming second, or Villa, which happened in the 80s and the 90s. There would be different teams who would be challenging and doing something, and you would be surprised about that. And Liverpool would win the league in the end, but there were other teams that were able to do something, and obviously that is more or less no longer possible. I think what Liverpool, you have to give them credit also, that what's happened with Liverpool is that winning the Champions League has made them a different team. It's given them a different kind of confidence and authority in their play, where they turn up, they expect to win, they know they're going to win, and they win when they're playing badly. And you've seen that with lots of other Liverpool teams over the years. You saw it with Fergie's United teams, where getting that initial success just raises the level. And you can only give Liverpool credit for their ability to do that. I don't know if it will continue, but until someone beats them in the league, and until they suffer some injuries, or until and something happens to hit their confidence, it just looks like they're going to keep going. And again, you don't want it happening for the sake of the league, but there's not very much that can be done about it, because here we are.